Subtitle to this would be God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect plan. The latter part of Judges 13, where we left off, it says that Samson grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. Last time we focused on the birth of Samson and noticed a lot of similarities between his birth and that of John the Baptist. However, as Samson grew, God was working on him, and he became restless. As we saw the Spirit stirring in him, he became restless, but he did not have a direct call to ministry like John the Baptist did. He was still, at this time, trying to find his place in God. And part of that restlessness led him to Timnah, a town located in the tribe of Dan near the neighboring country of Philistia, which was the dominating country at the time, and their citizens would be seen throughout various parts of Israel. In Judges 14, we pick up there, beginning at the first verse. It says that Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She is the right one for me." We don't know why Samson was there in Timnah in the first place, maybe sensing some leading of the Lord, and not yet feeling the official call to become a judge of Israel. It's in this context, as he goes about his business, he saw a Philistine woman whom he knew nothing about, but who was pleasing to his eyes, disregarding the fact that she was a daughter of the enemy. So guided not by his heart or by his head, but by his eye, how would he tell his parents that he was interested in her? The conversation about her was a far cry from the conversation parents would have with the son about an arranged marriage, where the parents choose the bride. In this case, the parents are not telling the son what the arrangements are. The son is telling the parents to make the arrangements as if they are his subcontractors hired to do his bidding. Maybe Samson is being idealistic in flirting with the idea of marrying the enemy, but it's his parents' money that he's playing with. They are the ones to pay the bride's family a dowry. And by his demands, he seems to have this sense of entitlement, arrogance even, thinking that he should have whatever he wants. In this conversation, we see how it escalates, with him first ordering his parents around without considering their feelings about the woman. They don't even know her. In fact, he doesn't even know her. And to think that he's a Nazirite, someone whose life is devoted to God, yet he disobeys one of the 10 Commandments, which says to honor your mother and your father. But then the parents, they come back and they escalate the tension by using a derogatory term to describe the woman he's thinking about marrying. They could have stopped the conversation at encouraging Samson to marry someone among his own people, but they had to go there and call the woman a derogatory term, one of those uncircumcised Philistines. And we can tell by this dialogue that the story is not going to end up well. And in verse 4, parenthetically, the writer inserts, he says his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion, meaning the right opportunity at the right time to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. It's out of this argument that God is planning to accomplish his will. Not that God is directing Samson down this path of dishonoring his parents, but God, knowing the path Samson is going to take, God uses that path for his own purposes to overthrow or begin to overthrow the Philistines. So even when our sons and daughters do not go down the path that we want for them, God can still use them for his ultimate purposes. And this truth is something we can hold on to when we wonder why they cannot see what we can see. They can't see all the trouble that they will get into with some of their decisions. And we get frustrated and almost go to blows. And our conversations end with crushed feelings all around. But the problem is not that they cannot see what we can see. The problem is that at times we cannot see what God is seeing. We may be so consumed by fear about what others may think about our child-rearing skills that we cannot see what God is seeing. That's not always the case, but it's something to consider before hurling insults at our sons and daughters about decisions they make. And we can then believe that maybe God has a greater purpose in mind for them. Samson went down to Timnah, verse 5. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. And as they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. And the writer just inserts this episode to make us aware of what leads to Samson becoming a judge or deliverer of Israel. In verse 6 it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. So Samson and his parents were traveling together in a sense, but they were not really together. He must have gone on ahead so he wouldn't have to see them or talk to them. And as he got to the vineyards first, the young lion that was there to chase away the foxes and jackals sprung up to attack him. But the Spirit of God came upon him and endowed him with supernatural strength. And this is all out of view of the parents because he wasn't really with them. So Samson, with his bare hands, chopped up that lion like a butcher carving meat at the butcher shop. And he becomes the ultimate super action hero. Just like the one in the movies who gets into a vicious fight, but afterwards not a strand of hair is misplaced, not a stain of sweat on his shirt, no cuts or bruises anywhere. And when his parents finally caught up with him, Samson still gave them the silent treatment and didn't say anything about the lion. And together they continued on down to Timnah, where Samson got to talk to his girlfriend some more, and his parents got to talk to her parents about the two getting married. Then they all returned home to plan for the wedding. And when that time came, he went back down with his parents, and on the way he ducked into the vineyards again to see what remained of the lion. And he saw the carcass was still there, but inside a swarm of bees and some honey that he scooped up and ate. Now, this time the father went first. The father went ahead, paid the dowry, made the arrangements and the announcement that the groom was coming, and made sure the wedding reception was all set. A 7-day event, after which Samson would whisk the bride away for their honeymoon. And since Samson was traveling alone with his parents, the bride made arrangements for him to have 30 groomsmen, including the best man. For Samson's father to throw such a huge event like this, so many people for such a long time, he must have had some money and status. And that could help explain Samson's arrogance, sense of entitlement, and demand to marry someone of a dominating class to validate himself. And then for entertainment, we have verse 12. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Essentially what he's promising is, or what they're trading on, betting on, a fancy suit for each of them, a fancy suit and a fancy shirt for each man in his wedding party. In verse 13, if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us your riddle, they said. Let's hear it. And he replied, out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days, they couldn't give him the answer. And so they leaned on Samson's bride to get her to find out the answer. Samson, keep in mind, he had no friends there. Doesn't seem like he had any friends. And these groomsmen, they turned out to be unsavory characters. In verse 15, it says, on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? This is a very drastic threat, and she took them quite seriously. In verse 16, then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? In verse 17, she cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, and she's really in distress, on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. What's amazing is that under duress, the couple revert to using language like my people, her people, your people. In their case, love did not conquer all their differences. And this is the one thing the parents saw, but Samson could not. That love can be a powerful and blinding emotion, but under duress, people might change, and you might not recognize them any longer. So you should start out with someone with whom you have shared a shared set of values. So what kind of person was the woman? She pressed Samson for the answer to the riddle and told her people. But I wouldn't call her treacherous, as some might say, because she did this under duress, believing that the 30 men were serious, and they were, about carrying out their threat. However, on the other hand, true love on Samson's part would have looked beyond her immediate actions and tried to understand her motivations. But he did not have that type of character to want to understand. His marriage was a fatal mix of arrogance, entitlement, selfishness, lust. He missed her legitimate tears and fears and focused only on himself and the fact that he lost the bet. In verse 18, it says that before sunset, on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, give me the answer to the riddle, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Now he's calling her a derogatory term. He's calling her a derogatory term himself. Then the Spirit of the Lord came down upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon, another major city in Philistia, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to the friend who had attended him at his wedding. Now, these 30 men, they may have been at a religious festival, all dressed up, in their own country at some festival, all dressed up in their fine clothes, when Samson killed them and stripped them of their clothes. So what kind of man was Samson? Impulsive, impetuous, hot-headed. He was looking through the eyes of you people stick together and could not see the pressure his wife was under or her love for him. He could only see a perceived slight, perceived betrayal. And he makes the same assumption about his wife that his parents did, that those uncircumcised Philistines are all alike. And then from the human point of view, how could Samson justify killing innocent men just to fulfill a bet that his victims knew nothing about? But despite all of his shortcomings, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, telling us, showing us that God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect plan. And at that moment, without Samson realizing it, Samson was turned into a judge, executing judgment on the Philistines for their role in celebrating their gods, for helping them to dominate Israel. Samson here becomes the deliverer. But after the divine power of the Spirit left him, all that Samson was left with, not the Spirit of God dwelling all around him or in him, all he was left with was the human emotion of anger and no one at his side. So Samson experienced superhuman strength, but because of his character, he also experienced a life full of drama and despair. But if our lives are dull and ordinary, and we haven't been on the mountaintop with God, and we haven't been used to bringing down strongholds, be grateful. Because it takes just as much divine power of the Spirit to keep the drama away from our lives and to give us a quiet and peaceable life as the power that Samson had. So be grateful. Be grateful for the life that you do have. Amen.